Welcome to News 9 Plus Politics, everyone. I'm WMUR Political Director Adam Sexton, joined by John DeStaso, the esteemed Dean of the Political Press Corps here in New Hampshire. We're at the Bridges House. Yep. Rarely, if ever, do we get to be in this wonderful historic setting, and we've had some major news here today. If you're a political insider watching this thing, you know that Governor Sununu has opted to run for a fourth term as governor and not for the U.S. Senate. Big shockwaves through the national political scene. But John, let's pivot right away to what happens next. First, in the U.S. Senate race, who are some of the big Republican names right now who are commenting to you, talking to you about what their plans are or are not?
Right. Well, so far today I've got two no's. One from Scott Brown, former Senator Scott Brown, who said that no, he's not interested in running for the U.S. Senate, even though the governor is not, because he's totally invested with his wife's congressional race. Gail Huff Brown is a candidate for, as many know, for the first CD. And then just a few minutes ago, we heard from sources close to former Senator Kelly Ayotte, who had been rumored to be a candidate for governor if Chris Sununu ran for the Senate. And the word is from sources close to her, who I believe she will not seek any office in 2022. So the search is on, I would think. There's some other names that we're both going to be trying to nail down and see what we can come up with. But one name that comes to mind, and again, I don't know that he was prepared for this, is State Senate President Chuck Morse, who had been thinking about running for governor also, and possibly for the first CD, first congressional district, but he now becomes a potential candidate for the U.S. Senate. Yeah. And, you know, who are some of the names that have you heard?
Well, before we get to more speculation, I'm just, curious for your perspective on, the idea that, obviously the biggest of the big names was Chris Sununu with the high approval rating, the COVID, people thinking he did a good job through the COVID-19 pandemic. All the poll numbers were there. This was looking like a seat that would be a Republican pickup potentially in November of 2022. So his name comes off the board. Scott Brown comes off the board. He ran in 2014. Still fairly well known, checks the box as a Trump supporter, potentially had that cachet to be able to fundraise right away. Then Kelly Ayotte's name comes off the board. This is really a stunning development, isn't it? The idea that the Republicans lose in the span of a couple of hours the three biggest names who could run for U.S. Senate.
That's exactly right. And, Chris Sununu made it clear that he felt that he could have beaten Maggie Hassan. Of course, it was a year from the election, and Maggie Hassan is often underestimated. So be that as it may, he was just not cut out, he said, and I think those of us who followed him can understand that, to be a legislator. So now you have to look for someone who perhaps has been a legislator or is more of a fit to be in the United States Senate, but more importantly, being able to collect and attract the type of fundraising that Chris Sununu would have attracted immediately. If he had just announced for the Senate, I mean, he would have already had, I don't know, millions of dollars, starting from scratch, millions of dollars in his war chest. So in terms of shaking up the landscape, I mean, as you said, I've been around a while, and I'm hard-pressed to recall a day where we've had news like this, unexpected news.
Right. And now so wide open, this means we're probably going to hear some new names, fresh faces. This is really a chance for a lot of people to step up and prove themselves as candidates. For a moment, though, can we just mourn not having this sort of from the get-go marquee Senate race of a Sununu versus a candidate like Maggie Hassan, who is in that first term in the Senate? I would just like to make a terrible analogy. I love making terrible football analogies here. The stylistic differences between Sununu and Hassan were so stark, and it was fascinating. If anybody would have ever hung around the executive council when Sununu was on the executive council and Hassan was governor, she was much less guarded in her messaging. She was, she's a brilliant attorney, very smart person who was willing to engage in a little bit more back and forth. As a candidate, she's much more reserved and disciplined in her messaging and what she says. But their interactions on the executive council were great, back and forth in terms of people who love politics, to watch sort of that back and forth of of two different perspectives, they interacted a lot. And so I guess we're going to have a little brief, like the world's smallest violin, playing a sad song for us here of not being able to see that play out.
Exactly. Yep.
But, the bad football analogy I wanted to make, Sununu, as he was talking about, he's a freewheeling style. This was like Brett Favre, basically, throwing the ball around all over the place. Whereas Maggie Hassan is more of a controlled offense that was going to grind it out 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And I think it was going to be a real test of, who could win in the end in terms of a race like that, where you have those, Sununu is willing to go deep, throw those long balls, maybe he's going to throw an interception, whereas Hassan would be disciplined and just playing it by the book every time. Who knows? We'll never know now.
I agree with that analogy. That's great. I mean, she was a much more, she was not like Chris Sununu as governor, but she was much more, and I don't mean this as an insult, Democrats, but she was much more relaxed, it seemed like, just spontaneous as governor. And now one of the raps against her is that she's very, very controlled. She does work down there. It's not that she's not working, but her message is a very controlled message.
Yeah.
And so now, who will she end up running against? I mean, I never ruled Maggie Hassan out to begin with, honestly. Even against Chris Sununu. I know that he would have entered the race being the favorite. But now, I mean, they've got to be feeling pretty good today.
Right. I mean, and the fact that there's no, exactly like we mentioned, that these big dominoes fall, no big name is going to come forward. Still, structurally, it's tough for a party that has the presidency, both houses of Congress. It's almost impossible. I think 2002 was the last time President George W. Bush actually made some gains. Coming off of 9/11, it was a little bit different situation.
Sure,
but
yeah.
Historically, the party in power loses in the midterms, loses seats one way or the other. And so that's traditionally the way things go. Let's talk, though, John, a little bit about some of the names you mentioned. Could Chuck Morse jump in? We see some Republicans, like a name like Jeff Cousins in CD2. Do we think that maybe somebody like him, he has a little bit of a national security background, he might look at this now, and this is just us just talking here. We haven't spoken to anybody related to his campaign. Does somebody like that look at this and say, hey, my district might be getting much more difficult to navigate in redistricting. Maybe I should jump up and try the U.S. Senate?
Well, certainly when the Republicans rolled out their congressional map a week ago that we talked about, and I won't belabor that, but long story short is that map, I think, made the climb for Jeff Cousins that much steeper. And he might actually have a better shot at trying to run a statewide race. Of course, he's a first-time candidate for anything, and it's really tough to just come out of nowhere and run a U.S. Senate race.
But somebody's going to have to do that
Somebody's going to have to do that, and they're going to have to try to attract the same excitement, same level of or close to the same level of excitement among the big, the leadership in Washington, the money people in Washington, and throughout the country that Chris Sununu did. And that's going to be a tall order. So I think by the time we meet next week on this, Adam, we're going to have a much more definitive look at what the lineup is going to look like on both sides, because the other side of this is who's going to run for governor against Chris Sununu.
Great segue, because all along, and Education Commissioner Frank Edelblut was really making no secret, publicly, even though he wasn't saying I'm running for governor, all of the moves being made. He and former Senator Kelly Ayotte looked like they were heading towards a battle for governor. Now that's off the table with Governor Sununu running for re-election. So Frank Edelblut has to wonder what he's going to do next. And then also, in a theoretical race for governor, Chris Pappas, right? That was another name that was talked about as maybe, if the district in CD1 gets too difficult for him, or for any Democrat for that matter, that maybe he would take an eye on an open governor's race seat. That's now out of the question for him. So interested for your take on first Frank Edelblut and then Chris Pappas.
Yeah, Frank Edelblut, I mean, I think that he was all set to run for governor. I mean, I have no great inner line to Frank Edelblut, but you just watch his posts, the places he's been, the message that he's been delivering, and he really seemed to be setting himself up for a run for governor, and it would have been a very interesting primary with him and Senator Ayotte, a real hardline conservative against a more establishment Republican. Where would Frank Edelblut go now? Would he run for the U.S. Senate? I suppose that's possible at this point. there's other names that I've thought of that have been in the mix throughout the year. One other one came up is former Commissioner of HHS John Stevens. Stephen, not an S on the end. And I'm not sure. John is very. I know he's been interested in getting back into politics, but I also know that he's running a very successful business. So that remains to be seen. So there's another name. You brought up Chris Pappas. There were a lot of Democrats who were going to really not put pressure on him, but, recruit him, lobby him to run for governor if Sununu did not. They may still try to do that because he may still be the strongest candidate. I think that Councilor Warmington, Cindy Warmington from right here in Concord, would have been I think she would have, this is just me talking, I think she would have run for governor if Sununu did not. Now, would she run against Chris Sununu?
Chris Pappas.
Right. Well, would she run against Chris Pappas in a primary?
And now would she run against
and then
Chris
would
Sununu?
she even want to run against Chris Sununu in a general? That's more questionable.
Yeah, everybody's sorting things out this morning. We do want to point out there is a declared U.S. Senate candidate already in Don Bolduc, the big winner of the morning, really. He's sitting here now, sort of, with an open field and really to capitalize there. He's spoken to President Trump on the phone. We'll see what happens with that. He's been working hard and really capturing a base there. Of people that have been activated against vaccines and vaccine mandates. So we'll see what he can do with that. But it's a narrow slice that he's going for right now. It's going to be tough if a bigger name gets in and then gets that big Washington support.
And the general, for all of his resume, and he has an amazing resume, he hasn't raised. He's raised like $60,000. I mean, there are state Senate seats that raise more than $60,000. He just hasn't been able to get that attraction. Now, will he now because Sununu's out? It's possible. Yeah,
and love it or hate it, I mean, money in a U.S. Senate race is the coin of the realm, literally.
Even here, even in New Hampshire, a small state like this, because, the market is there's an expensive market in many ways, and so I mean, you've got to raise. This would have been a $150 million race with all the money on both sides together, I think. It still could be a very expensive race. First, we've got to figure out that candidate, and you and I will, Adam. I have no doubt about that.
We got a couple more minutes here. Just wrapping it up, John. I mean, as you mentioned, you've been covering politics for 40 years here in New Hampshire. This right now, we're at this kind of wide open phase right here, even though the governor is going to run for re-election right now. Just can you speak to the aspect of there really is just this sort of like anything is possible here in the next 12 months?
It's always been a next in line, next step up, really on the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side. And I think the Democrats now try to stay away from really contested primaries. They did have one last year. That's becoming more and more difficult because of the progressive nature. But it's it's a totally different world. Anything goes. There may be some candidate out there or person out there, activist out there, who is saying, "Why not me?" And now you can do that. You can do that just through social media. You don't need to start with a lot of money. Eventually, you do, but you don't need to start that way. So it's not like I hate to say it, but that's not like the old days where you would just have the next, you knew who the next person, Senator Gregg, for instance, Judd Gregg, executive council, right?
You could see it coming a mile away.
Congress, governor, U.S. Senate. I mean, and then the next would step up, John E. Sununu,
right,
being that one. So yeah, it's a fascinating situation. And the governor also mentioned how he wants to be a player in the 2024 presidential primary, which is another interesting.
And we'd be remiss if he didn't, this is a long way out in the future potentially. One last little note here. Governor Sununu was basically asked by our former colleague James Pindell that, could he run for president someday? And he didn't really tamp that down at all. Clearly he wants a national profile and a national role in the party. Who knows what that looks like? But that's something that was sort of a, footnote to today is keep an eye on this for the long term. The governor is clearly thinking about building a continued national profile in the Republican Party.
And as a manager, he also didn't rule out when I did ask him about a secretary,
Right.
cabinet
Yeah.
post. That seems like a potential. You know, I wasn't sure how he'd react to that because he'd still have a boss, being the president. But if he had a high-profile cabinet position, that could also be a political stepping stone for those who think along those lines.
Right. Well, an amazing morning in New Hampshire politics. It's not even 1 o'clock yet. So it's remarkable how much has happened in just the last few hours. Here we are at the Bridges house. Allegedly, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars in the walls here. If you know the history, Senator Stiles Bridges may or may not have been the most upstanding citizen. Hopefully I'm not speaking ill of the dead here, but the legend has it that Stiles Bridges had a lot of cash on hand and that it may or may not have been stuck in the walls here. So it was never found in the remodel, so John and I are going to go poke around and see if we can find that. For John DeStaso, I'm Adam Sexton. Thanks for watching News 9 Plus Politics.